to understanding intersectionality. I am Barb Byers. I am a member of the Jedi Council for the Pennsylvania District. And I would like to introduce two speakers we have from the Pittsburgh area, Nathaniel Broadus and Micah Williams. I have the opportunity to work with both of these individuals on a diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion committee that we work on through our various work with some jail reentry initiatives that we're working on. So I am going to turn it over to them, and they're going to be speaking on intersectionality and introducing themselves a little more. Micah and Nate, take it away.
Thanks, Barb.
You gonna take us in, Nate?
Sure. So I'm gonna kick us off. So my name is Nathaniel Broadus. I am a workforce specialist at an organization called Catalyst Connection. I'm sorry. Give me 1 second. I apologize. My screen's I'm having a hard time seeing.
No worries.
There we go. All right, I got it.
Age of technology, and everyone still has technological glitches.
Yes. So I'm a workforce specialist at an organization called Catalyst Connection. Most of my work responsibilities are around connecting with job seekers, connecting with manufacturing companies in the southwestern Pennsylvania area, and connecting with community organizations to create new pathways to careers in manufacturing. We're a nonprofit consulting company that does a whole lot of stuff that's boring, and I won't try to bore you guys with it right now. But really, this, doing this work and the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion was, really important to, being able to be successful in helping people from different communities be able to integrate into new environments at work. And, whenever I had the opportunity to connect with Micah and Barb and have this conversation about intersectionality, it really sparked something that I think was really important in my own brain. And before I kick it to Micah, one thing that I really want to say is that, I really want to, publicly thank Micah, and I want everybody to know that if you see anything on your screen today, it's because Micah made it. And, she definitely, was a big leader in this entire process, and I appreciate her. And with that, I'll kick it to her.
Well, as I said to Nate earlier, I don't have children, so kudos to you for working and having a kid. Whenever we're talking online or meeting, he's always got his son there babbling in the background and laughing. So I was happy to take on the side part. So my name is Micah Williams. I work for an organization called Foundation of Hope. I didn't know, Barb, were you going to do introductions? We sent you bios, or should I just do it myself, I guess?
Yeah.
Micah, I folded on the bio, so I think we just got to do it.
Oh, no problem. Not at all. So I didn't know how much of my background I should give. So I'm originally from Boston, and I lived in San Francisco for 20 years, and that's where I got my education. I went to UC Berkeley for undergrad and studied English and rhetoric, and then studied law at UC Hastings, and then moved to Pittsburgh. And since I've been here, I've basically been focused on supporting populations that are underrepresented. That's what I did all through law school. So, whether that was elders or people who are incarcerated. And now I'm also I have a little sister. But in my work, professional life right now, I the work we do is to help people who would otherwise be arrested for offenses related to substance use and mental health, and we give them services instead. So the idea is that people, instead of being criminalized for things that most people do really in some form or fashion, some people have problematic substance use, and some people have more behavioral health challenges than others. Instead of criminalizing that, then we give them support and help them try to become stable. So that's the work that I do now. So I'm going to lead you through. I'm just going to roll back a little bit, and this is going to be the outline for today. We're going to give you a little history and background. Nate's going to take us through an exercise with what is called an identity wheel. We're going to talk about misperceptions and assumptions around what we think of each other and assume about each other. And then we're going to talk about some action steps we can take to become more aware, better at our work. And then, we'll answer any questions you might have. So to talk about intersectionality, it is a term that was coined. It is has origins in feminism. The first wave of feminism, and I don't know how many people actually studied feminism. I actually did. Instead of taking U.S. history, I took women's U.S. history, and that was fantastic because you just get history from a whole different perspective. But the first wave of feminism, happened before women had the right to vote, and around the turn of the 19th century, and that was historically led by white middle-class women, heterosexual women as well, and they specifically excluded Black, Brown, Indigenous women of color. And the reason for this was that white women felt like if they included Black women and Brown and Indigenous women in their struggle, it would keep them from making progress, right? It was too many issues to deal with at once. Their issues weren't really about race, they were about women's rights. Though women of color saw it differently. So later on, in the mid 20th century, women started to expand their understanding of what it meant to be, a woman of color and trying to struggle for women's rights. These were different struggles, but they were all women, right, having the same struggle. So they were just expanding the lens to try to understand this stuff. And later in around 1990, Kimberly Crenshaw wrote an article mapping the margins, and in it she talks about how people can have different experiences. They started to have language for it. So critical race theory is something you see a lot these days. It's become sort of a controversial term, but really all it is and was and continues to be is creating language for people to identify issues that haven't been identified before, finding a way to discuss things that just haven't been discussed. And for critical race theory, intersectionality was a big eye-opener. And it said, hey, you can be a woman, I can be a woman. And when we walk into a room, we're going to have a different experience, even though we're both women, because I'm Black, you're, Chinese, you're Mexican, you're white. And, a great example is like looking for a job, someone who is white and gay, even a woman who is white and gay may walk into a job interview, but her gayness isn't necessarily something you know about or see. So it's something she could just choose to put away and, to help it, her not have it be an issue for her. Where a Black woman walks into an interview, her race will always be the first thing that people see, will always be a consideration. So the white woman will never experience a barrier because of her race in terms of the culture that we live in anyway. So it's about privilege and oppression. And it's become more broadly used now. So it's because it's such a great concept, it's a great way of starting to tap into the experiences of people who are not like us. We have begun to identify different ways to use intersectionality, but it is based in discrimination, it is based in oppression and barriers, and understanding how you can have intersections, but also have very different barriers and different obstacles to life.
All right. So as we talk about intersectionality, one of the things that I think about a lot is what are my own intersections, right? How do the different pieces of my experiences in life, how do they come together to make me who I am? And how do they affect the way that I interact with the world around me, right? So as Mike has said, the first thing that people notice above all else when I walk in a room is, even before they notice that I'm a man, is they notice that I'm Black, right? And then they'll notice that I'm a Black man. And then once they get to know me, they'll get to notice that I'm a Black man who's a father, right? Not just I'm a father of two. So these are all things that kind of make me different than my peers, right? I'm a Black man who's a father who has, a cognitive disability, right? So that's something that makes me different than other people around me, that people can't see with their eyes, right? So, those are some intersections that I have that I identify as, we'll look at the identity wheel in the next slide. If you could skip to that one, Micah.
I have to, oh, there it is.
Perfect. Yeah. So the identity wheel. So these are some of the ways that we look at, the ways that we can identify our own intersections. So, as we build out from each circle here, you can see that, the things tend to, become a little bit less personal. So these are all the things that we're born with. These are the things that, we acquire throughout life. And this is the way that we can use this stuff within the workplace. So I was actually wondering if somebody on this call could go through here and maybe identify what a few of their intersections would be by looking at this identity wheel.
Okay.
Thanks, Sean.
I am a white male. I am gay. I am a 6.5 foot tall white gay male. Middle income, I guess. Religion, kind of agnostic, I guess. Yeah.
Okay. No, that's great. So real quick, does 6.5 foot mean you're 6'6", or does it mean you're?
I should say 6.5 foot, 6'5". I'm trying to make it a little taller than I really am.
But you're 6'5" though?
Yes.
Mhm.
All
Ceiling
right.
fans
So
are my
like, yeah,
enemy.
so that's the thing you have going on, is that you're much bigger than probably 98% of the people on the planet. That's interesting. So yeah, so I think that, what Sean identified is, that he has, several intersections, some of which you can see, right? We can all see that Sean is a giant man, that Sean's a white man. We wouldn't be able to guess his age. We wouldn't be able to guess or assume his sexual orientation or anything else like that about him. But, the fact that, he's a white man, I'm assuming that, and you're a very large man, I'm assuming that during, as you move through the world, that you have assumptions made about you, probably just regarding those three things, right? Probably just regarding the final thing, the fact that you're a huge dude, right? I mean, I have a cousin who's 6'9", and this, aside from everything else that he's going on, he's the same thing as me. He's a black man, he's a dad, lots of other stuff. But aside from all of that stuff, him being 6'9" and 320 pounds is like one of the main things that affects the way that he moves through the world every day, whether it's his ability to literally physically be in certain spaces, whether it's, hey, I have to go this way and I have to, walk up behind this person, and I want to, maybe I'll cut an angle and come this way so they don't feel uncomfortable, this big black guy coming behind them. So, I think that as we look at all these things, they're really things that, make up who we are as a person, but it also makes up the way that people interact with us. So, as I'm looking at my own, whenever I think of my personality, I think I'm a person who I'm an outspoken person, right? I like to speak up for other people. I'm very silly. Drive my fiance and my kids crazy. I'm actually sillier than my kids, and it becomes a problem for them sometimes. I'm 30. I just turned 36. As far as physical ability, I'm 5'9", maybe 160 pounds. So I'm a pretty thin guy, and I'm not in the best shape right now compared to where I was when I was in the military or whatever. I'm a black man. I'm a heterosexual black man. I'm unmarried, but I'm engaged. We're getting married August 27th. But what really affects me, and the places that I encounter, is my work experience, right? So I have a much different background professionally than most of the people who I interact with on a daily basis, and a lot of times that can have a serious negative impact on the work that I'm looking to do, based on the perceptions of the people around me that I'm looking to work with and their knowledge of my background. So yeah, Sean, I appreciate you sharing. But yeah, the identity wheel to me is a great exercise. It's a great way to really step outside yourself and look at, you know, society wants to us all to be one thing, right? None of us are all just one thing. So I think that, you know, as we look to figure out like, all right, what are all of the many things that make up, you know, me as a person? I think this is a great place to start.
Before I do that, does anybody else want to go? Did anybody else want to touch on some points on this wheel? You know, we would love to be interactive. It can even be things that, you know, maybe don't, you know, aren't ostensibly on the surface, something that other people might think is a challenge for you, but because, you know, of whatever reason, one of these things on this wheel might present an obstacle, a challenge. Go ahead, Barb.
I'll take a stab at it. I'm actually pretty introverted, kind of my personality. I do okay in a group, but my preference is small groups, quiet. I am middle-aged, pushing the other end. I'm rocking that bell curve. I am a heterosexual female, middle income, physical ability. I can walk, but work experience. I've been working in the same field for 30 years. I've been working with individuals with developmental disabilities, and that kind of puts me in a, you know, that kind of gives me a whole other, I guess, outlook on things. Religion, I am United Methodist. I do have one son. Marital status, I am divorced and I am in a relationship right now. And let's see, I'm trying to see the other things. I mean, yeah, it's being involved in the community is also very important to me. That's part of, you know, who I am. And so that's kind of, I guess, me in a nutshell. So.
You spoke to two things that I thought were really interesting, Barb. So your work experience, you've been working in the people serving industry, working with people with developmental disabilities for 30 years. And one thing that we know is that, one thing that I know, my mom did similar work before she passed. But one thing that we know is that number one, you have to have, it takes a lot of experience to be good at that work. And you know, there's a lot of really well-educated people that are doing that work in that field. We also know that almost everybody in that field is like extremely underpaid, right? Like it's extremely underfunded industry. So one of the things that we hear in society is that if you work hard, you go and you get your education and you go to work and you work hard every day. We know that people in that field bust their butts every day. Like it's incredibly hard work. But that those sorts of like financial incentives won't ever, like, you know, may never ever come your way, despite the fact that you might come to work and be the best person at doing what you do for your entire career. And I think that that's an interesting intersection as well, because, you know, maybe because I think that they're in that field, I think I see people. Let me see how this, I want to say what I'm going to say. In that field, I think that it's easy to make assumptions about the people who do that sort of work, or the people who are drawn to that sort of work. But you know, without really having, you know, a wider breadth of knowledge, you know, it's sort of like with any of the other intersections that we're talking about. It's incredibly easy to make those assumptions about, you know, a whole group of people based on, number one, what society expects of people, and number two, you know, your own ignorance about what's going on. So yeah, no, I appreciate you you sharing, Barb.
Absolutely, thank you.
Anybody else feeling brave?
I'd like to add a comment. I'm Sandra Stotz-Fenton. I'm from the Ohio district. And
Hi, Sandra.
the one thing, hi. The one thing that I noticed, like that I think about is, while we can look at the wheel today as we are, we've evolved, you know, through our lives. So I can think of an example of it, maybe income, where we might be in one certain income level today, but growing up, it might have been, you know, where we were, you know, didn't know if our meal was going to be provided, you know, so very different way. I can also think about sexual violence or violence, maybe at some point in your life, you had some kind of experience, traumatic experience. Well, that's going to affect you today, even though, you may not talk about or to see it, but it definitely will change your perception and who you are as a person.
Man, Sandra, you just said some great stuff right there. So I think that like it's super important to understand that some of this stuff can change, right? So the things that you find on the green wheel is stuff that is aside from age, and of course we know sexual orientation can be fluid. Aside, but most of the stuff, age, race, and ethnicity are the three things that we really can't change. Outside of all this other stuff, we know that there's a potential for it to change a lot. And so, one of the things that I dealt with is that I actually grew up and had a pretty middle class upbringing. My parents, both my mom was a teacher, my dad did construction. They were able to give us a pretty nice upbringing. And then I made some mistakes as a young adult where I fell into abject poverty and ultimately homelessness. And it was through that where I'm just like, man, growing up in that middle class household didn't necessarily prepare me for that, right? And it was like, having, growing up and my household income being one level, and now I'm a different age, and now it's like significantly less. Like the way that you interact with that and the way that you can navigate that, I think that it all depends on, the experience that you had previously. And then the comment about violence, and especially, sexual violence, and the way that trauma is carried within people. I think that those are definitely important things that we should look at, because those things might ultimately affect your personal and recreational habits, your appearance, your ability to go to work or go to school, or even, your geographic place, like the place where you want to be. So yes, Sandra, that's awesome. I appreciate you mentioning that.
Yeah, me too. Thank you, Sandra. Does anybody else want to have any comments or want to take a swing at this before we move on? There's no rush. It's a discussion, interactive. Okay, well, I'll go. And what you were talking about both, Nate and Sandra, about income. Like my mom was single mom. Even, my dad was sort of in and out of the picture. And they're just really interesting people. My dad was a Jesuit monk who decided not to become a priest. He speaks 3 languages. He's also very tall. He's also very Black. And he was I think he was the only Black monk in his order. He speaks fluent Chinese. You wouldn't know that. He worked in but he's also an alcoholic. And so that was a barrier for him. He could not get past. So he tended to work, just a lot of service jobs and not very steadily. But there's some funny stories from that, because if, Chinese national individuals would come in and speak in Chinese, he could listen to their conversations when they wouldn't know that he was listening in, and he would have funny comment. He was always kind of had a great sense of humor. So, he would say something, and then like one time 2 gentlemen, businessmen, were talking, and then he commented, and then they said to each other, "The Black man speaks Chinese." And he said, "All Black men speak Chinese." And they just kind of threw them for a loop. They were like, "What?" But myself, I am, biracial by descent. I grew up in a pretty Jewish and mixed Jewish and Christian town. Most of my friends were white. I had challenges being mixed race. The kids who came in from out of town were like bussed in, who were Black, didn't really understand me. I was also like poor in a very affluent upper middle class town. So I had the, brown corduroy bell bottoms from the thrift store where other people were doing and I'm going to date myself now, the pinstripe jeans and the Nikes, like white leather Nikes with the red Nike stripe. I always sort of grew up in the twixt and the tween, never quite accepted. Dating happened very late for me. I thought I was a freak for a long time because of the way kids made fun of me. And I'm a pagan. You wouldn't know that looking at me. Like, I'm not making any human sacrifices or anything, but I sort of go by the natural, by nature. So nature, for me, God is a concept I can't really like quite wrap my mind around, but I can see that spring happens and that summer happens and fall happens and winter happens. I know that the moon changes. And so for me, that's something that gives me order in my life, and I can work with that, you know. I was also a musician, and before I was also, you know, working artist. So I always worked, but I wasn't making a lot of money. Money was never on my scope. I wanted to make music and be a professional artist. I do have a website. You can go check it out. So, you know, and then life changed for me and I became an attorney. But these are all things that, you know, you wouldn't know. And certainly being a brown woman, I think most of the things that I just said, most people would not assume about me. You know? So that just kind of gives you an idea about how we make assumptions about people just sort of based on what we see, you know, our first impressions. And I think that's a good segue into this next piece, because most of our conditioning comes from our social norms. You know, we don't even realize that we have expectations about other people, just based on what we're used to, you know, being what we're fed on television. You know, you might not know that someone is vision or hearing impaired, right? They have, and with the barriers they have to go through on a daily basis just to do the same things that we do and take for granted. I have a story I was telling Nate about how in law school I just had this romantic vision of going to the library and studying because it's like what you see in all the movies. And then I would get to the library and the desk would be too high and the chairs would be too short, because I realized that the world made libraries for men at some point and they never updated them for women. And so it was actually not comfortable for me. It wasn't romantic in any way. And I tended to not really enjoy myself when I would go to the library. So yeah, but also when you guys were talking about trauma, you know, we carry with us our personal history, and that can impact the way that we behave. It can impact the way that we present to other people, and we make, you know, assumptions about those things. Somebody who is introverted, like Barb, you know, someone might think, wow, that person's really aloof and unfriendly. You know, I've never thought of Barb as that way in any way, shape, or form. When she said she was introverted, I was really? But, you know, so just as an example, you tell a story to yourself, right? And so often a lot of the interactions that we're having are based on an inner narrative that we are creating ourselves, and not based on what the other person is really. You don't really know what's going on in their life. And I, you know, then the idea that we might make assumptions about people, about their ability to contribute based on those things. So, you know, for example, it doesn't even really matter, you know, I don't have to be specific, but say somebody is from an outside group, you know, there's a normative group that sort of is the majority, and then there's someone from the outside group, and the people in the normative group might say, you know, I don't really want to, this person can't really probably contribute to this conversation, or maybe can't, you know, bring to the table what we need because they're not from our group. You know, something that's sort of a good way to think about this is like hiring practices, right? For a long time, certain individuals in our country were not given the same opportunities to educate themselves, or, you know, pass down wealth from generation to generation. So they didn't get the same opportunities professionally as other people. And so when the resumes are going through, they're looking, you know, the hiring person is maybe looking at that resume for what they see on the page. Did this person go to this school? Did this person do the X, Y? You know, what's their experience? When really there's so much value in someone's lived experience, the stuff that they bring to the table that has to do with how they were raised and where they come from. So, you know, hopefully, and I think this is true, as we're starting to learn more about the value of somebody's lived experience, that becomes part of the discussion when you're hiring. So you might have a lot of candidates who have great resumes, and maybe you have the same person in your office, you know what I mean? Like you've got a bunch of people who sort of fit that same description, and maybe you want to think about, okay, well, if I bring somebody else in who maybe doesn't have as much experience, but they're going to bring a lens they're going to look through the world in a different way than all these other people. They're going to bring something of value to the group that all these other people couldn't bring. And that's not to say that all those other people don't also bring value to the group. It's just that this person's going to bring a different perspective that's going to be useful. Nate?
I was going to say the example I always use for that exact topic is that, say you're putting together a basketball team, right? So you have Hakeem Olajuwon, you have Shaq, you have Tim Duncan, right? Like naturally, those are three of the best players in history. But if you're building a team, the next best player, the best player you select cannot be another center, right? It has to be somebody else, somebody who's built different than those three guys, somebody who has a different skill set than those three guys. And it's like, even if the next guy is Wilt Chamberlain, that's not the next best selection, because despite the fact that he's amazing, he doesn't fit, he's the same thing as something that you already have, right? He's not going to be able to provide that difference in perspective, that difference in skill set. So I guess, Micah, is it okay? I know you were still talking. Do you want me to?
No, I'm good. I mean, like, I actually was hoping you would tell the land force story, yeah, you had a couple of good anecdotes. I thought that would be really useful.
I know. I was just joking that I have like 4 stories that I use in all my work meetings. And I've been in my job for like 2 years, and I know my coworkers are sick of it at this point. Like I got to go get some new life stories to come up with. But actually, so I didn't want to tell the land force story. I guess it just depends on whatever's on my heart at the time.
Sure.
But I really wanted to share a story about a guy who ended up being really important to me at a point in my life. So I guess I didn't share this at the beginning, but I'm a veteran of the United States Marine Corps. And that was probably one of the wildest points in my life. I think I said a few minutes ago that I found myself homeless at a point. And this recruiter, I started a job, I was working 48 hours a week. But I literally had to hang out on the street all night and then show up to work. And this recruiter used to come to my job every day. And I'm like, he comes in the one day, I'm like, bro, if you let me sign the paper, I will leave and go with you right now. Like take me with you. He was like, absolutely not. But he's like, but sign this paper, I'll get you out of here in a couple of weeks. So I'm in California. They shipped me out to California, and we're in this giant room. It's called a squad bay. It's like a giant room with like 60 beds in it, bunk beds. So there's like 120 guys in there. It smells terrible. I'm sure you guys, if any of you guys have teenage kids, I'm sure you could imagine. Terrible. And there's this guy next to me who's like on his phone with his girlfriend all day and all night. And every other word out of this guy's mouth is some sort of racial slur, right? I'm not even gonna, I'll spare you guys the specifics, but you can imagine, every racial slur for every Black, Hispanic, or Asian person, every slur that for gay people, like it was just flying out of his mouth, every other word. He would stub his toe, slur would fly out of his mouth. Oh, these people, and it was the hardest thing. So at the same time, me and this guy, so because of that, me and this guy always just used to butt heads. But at the same time, I could see that he was really butting heads with everybody, not just me, right? Like it turned out he was an angry kid. To the point where he got in a fight with somebody in the squad bay and stabbed him. Like it was the craziest thing. I'm sitting there like, wait a second, I thought I joined the military, but it kind of seems like the set of Oz. I don't know if you guys watch HBO, but it's good prison drama from the 90s. But so I ended up telling him, I was like, it would be the funniest thing, because we were supposed to get our own rooms, and we would have to have roommates. And I was like, like it would really be God's sense of humor if you got to be my roommate and you had to wake up and see my black face every day. Like that would be the funniest thing in the world. And because God does have a sense of humor, our names ended up being next to each other in the alphabet. And we really did end up becoming roommates. So, it was a lot of the same thing, racial slurs, every other word. He's on the phone with his wife. He used to always talk about if my son ends up grown up to be gay, I'm going to disown him. That was like the biggest thing for him to talk about. And I was like, well, you always talk about how much you like your kids, but it doesn't really seem like you like your kids that much if you want to disown them for, whatever their choice in sexuality would be, whatever. So but me and this guy, we used to fist fight, literally, every day and every night. It was probably one of the most stressful periods of my life. I was at a point where I was literally on my knees every night praying to God that he would get me out of the situation. And the way that he did get me out of that situation was not what I expected, because the reason why we had so much free reign to kind of just do so much crazy stuff and be getting in fights all day and all the stupid stuff is because all the guys who were senior to us were in Iraq at the time. So we were basically waiting for them to get back. We could start training up for our next deployment together. So they end up coming back from Iraq, and because the Marine Corps is so ripe with tradition, the biggest tradition that they had at the time was hazing. So what they would do is they would break in they had a guy who was really small. He could climb through our window, unlock our door from the inside, and they would break in our room in the middle of the night, like 2 o'clock in the morning, and just start kicking the crap out of us middle of the night in our sleep. So like it got really bad. I remember they broke in this guy's room, they stole all his stuff, they broke in this other people's room, they threw their beds off the 3rd deck, they broke in this other guy's room, and they peed all over his room. It was like probably one of the most like I said, it was like prison, right? Like I was not expecting any of this. So a lot of the younger guys who were my peers were of the mind that if these guys come and they want to mess with us in the middle of the night, we're just going to open the door, they can come in, do what they want to do, get the rocks off, and then hopefully they'll get bored and they'll leave. So but I'm not necessarily of that mind. Like I don't think that's how bullies work most of the time. But I knew that I was like, all right, so I don't want these guys to do this stuff to me. I don't really like my roommate, but I do know that he likes to fight, right? So the guys would start coming to our room, and we started to defend each other, right? We started to we would figure out like, look, if they're messing with him, then I'm gonna jump in it, so now it's not 7-on-1, and they might be discouraged. And that went on for maybe like 6 months, right? Like they're breaking our room, fighting both of us, we're fighting back and trying to defend ourselves. I couldn't believe any of this was happening.
Just
And
so
so
you know, Nate, we're gonna have to,
yeah. I'm gonna
okay.
cut
Not that I'm not enjoying the
I did tell the long
you got the
version, my
cue.
bad. I did tell the long version, but I'm gonna cut it real short. So, I had a conversation with him, and I was like, look, man, I can't fight you all day and fight these guys all night, right? Like we need to sit down. I would love to know, what happened in your life that developed the way that you feel about me, about all these other people. And to his credit, he was 100% honest with me. He told me about his background, about the things that his parents taught him when he grew up, about the situations that him and his mom kind of had to navigate, it with homelessness and with drug addiction. And by the end of that conversation, he came to the realization that, like, wait a second, Black people and Hispanic people and gay people, like, they didn't do any of this to me, right? But throughout his life, he was never able to see see his own story through another person's lens. And to this day, that guy's one of my best friends on the entire planet. I'm actually about to cry telling the story because I like him so much. But like, to me, like, that was one of the major things where we had so many assumptions and misperceptions about each other, and we were able to sit down and really talk them out, and talk about who we were as men. We were able to become best friends, right? So with that said, that's the end of my story. I know we're running out of time, so I would love to kick it back to Micah.
That's a beautiful story. And I think that one of the lessons that I think I take from that is leading with kindness, because you can break down a lot with kindness. Sandra, did you have something to say?
No, I was just clapping that I enjoyed
Oh, okay, sorry.
Sorry.
No worries. So anyway, we realized that, in the work that you do, you're going into different communities and trying to connect, hopefully with communities that are different than yours. And so we wanted to just ask you, what are some ways that you might learn about the communities that you serve? How do you connect with your communities? What kinds of intersections might you run into that you don't realize? I just wanted to kind of open up the floor, and I realized that we took up, I think Nate and I thought we had an hour, so we had 45 minutes, so we timed it out a little bit longer than we're supposed to, but yeah. Please go ahead.
I think Nate hit it right on the head. The best and easiest way is to have conversations with people in your community that you don't normally interact with. You learn more about the person, about their group of people, about, you know, things that are happening in your communities that you had no idea about. So that's the best and easiest way that I can think of. So thank you, Nate.
I kind of want to piggyback, if that's okay, Sean, on that. So, you know, I think that having those conversations is so important, especially when it comes to conflict, right? So, you know, recently professionally, I was working with a woman who happens to be a white woman, and we were looking at doing an event in a rural community, and she was looking to send a very young Black woman into that community by herself to do this event, right? So I brought it up to her that, you know, I don't necessarily feel comfortable with this young woman going to this place to do this event by herself. And from her perspective, as a white woman, she was offended by me saying that, because she was like, well, I don't see why she wouldn't be able to do well at this as a Black woman. Like, I don't get what you're saying, and didn't necessarily see the nuance of it from a safety perspective, right? That was, for me, was kind of common sense as a Black man. So I think that having those conversations is the way that we're able to break down those communication barriers and create greater understanding for each other's situations.
Amen.
Agreed. We also, I mean, does anybody else have any thoughts on that?
Oh,
Sarah,
Sarah's
so you
about to
want me
say
I
something.
think I have something. Yeah. I think what Sean brought up, like many of the Kiwanis clubs serve communities where, like, for me example, my club serves a community where I just work. I do not live there. I don't feel that it's, you know, I'm a part of it because I work there and I know that community, but it's a challenge for me to come in and do service sometimes because I don't want to be perceived as, oh, you're coming from the outside because you don't live here. But we may share some other commonalities and intersections that they don't know about because they just immediately, because I don't live here, you know, on this street, you know. So it's something I think I know our club struggles with, and I know other clubs struggle with, because we want to make sure our communities reflect, our clubs reflect the communities we serve. But sometimes that is a challenge because we can't reach that community.
I know we had to wrap, but I want to respond to Sarah real quick. That's
Yep.
something that I deal with a lot in my current job. So our organization, we're in the Hazelwood community.
Mhm.
Average household income in Hazelwood's about $14,000 a year. We're in a big, like, brand new multi-million-dollar tech facility that's smack dab in the middle of that community. And a lot of the people who are in that community are very offended by the fact that that building is even there, much less that our organization is there, much less that the demographics of the organization that's in that building looks nothing like the community that's around it. So one of the things that I did is, because I had relationships in that community a little bit prior to me coming there, is I made it very aware that, like, look, I'm aware of the way that the community feels about this organization being here. But that being said, you know, we feel like because we're here, we still have a responsibility to do right by the people who are in this community, right? And by posing it that way, like, look, all we want to do is we want to do right, and we want to do our responsibility. We want to do our due diligence to do right by the people in this community. And having them lead with, how can we best serve you? To me, that's been one of the most effective ways to kind of break down those barriers in that conversation.
I think that is
that's a
really,
major issue.
I can agree with that in my work as well. And I think finding ways to open up the floor, Sarah, to the community, like, you know, whether it's going to their community meetings and, you know, putting yourself on the agenda, which can sometimes be challenging too. And I respect that it's not always easy, because sometimes, like we talked about earlier, people are bringing their feelings and their history with them into the room. It doesn't really have to do with you specifically. It's what their frustrations are. So sometimes you have to let them vent and let it out, and don't try as much as you can not to take it personally. But once they get past that frustration, they're going to get to some truth and some helpful information for you. You know, if you come in and ask them, how can we serve you? What what does your community need? What are your concerns? What are your concerns about us being here? How can we help address that? But I worked with, just really quickly, the police and a community called in Northview Heights, which is a federal housing facility. They put a service station, a police service station right there in the center of this place that has historically been, underserved, completely opposed to police presence. Even the fire people coming in wouldn't go in without police because of the reaction that would be there. But the goal was to start to break down some of those perceptions between each other, and start to build some trust. And so by the police being there every day, but not just being there every day, but opening it up to the community. And again, it started with frustration and anger and people venting. And then after a while, it became people starting to actually get down to, well, this is what I'd like to see in a community space, or this is what I'd like to see from the police. I have kids. I want to see the cars slow down. I want to make sure that when I call the police, they're coming not to harm me, but to help me. And after being there for a year, it was my job to evaluate. I can honestly say that they developed a relationship with that community to where they knew them by name. They had nicknames for them. Officer, like Dreamy, like I think was one, because he was good looking. And if they can do it, anybody can do it. But opening up that floor and listening to the community and really taking seriously what they have to say, people want to be heard, and if you ask them, they will respect that. So, I mean, that's just me making a suggestion.
I want to dovetail off that a little bit. Kiwanis has a tool built into their Achieving Club Excellence, their ACE toolkit. It is a community survey. This is a great chance to send it out to your community members to find out what they're looking for, what programs could help your community. So check that out. It's on Kiwanis.org. Just look for ACE club tools.
And then one more thing to add to what Sean just said, find the community leaders and start the conversation with them, because they are a bridge to the rest of the people there. When the police would show up and everybody came out of their houses pissed off because they're arresting somebody, the community leader would go over, have a conversation with the police and be like, sorry, this guy has like a arrest warrant for like violence and rape. And they're like, well, thank you for getting him out of the community. And they go back and tell everybody else and everyone's like, thank you. So it like totally shifted the whole dynamic of the experience and people were suddenly feeling served and not threatened, But the community leaders were that bridge for sure.
Yeah, we're working through our community leaders. The community is West Philadelphia. I'm from Philadelphia.
Okay.
So there's a lot
Yeah.
going on.
I'm singing the song in my head right now, since you said it, right?
I went there too.
I have no idea.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
I know.
I am not Officer Dreamy.
Yeah, no, hey, Sarah, I appreciate you. I appreciate that. I think that, there's a whole bunch of other intersections that, being from Western Pennsylvania, I probably can't even imagine about what it's like to try to do that in Philly, that work in Philly. I know I've come out there to tour with some community organizations before, and the structure of the way that they do their work definitely seemed a bit different than what I was used to. I'll say this though, if you're there and, I think the biggest thing that we can show people is consistency. And, if people know that like, hey, I'm going to keep showing up because I genuinely want to do this work. And I'm assuming that if you're involved with Kiwanis Club and you show up to do this outside of work and in your free time, that it is something that's important to you, that, the consistency is going to be the thing that gets you over the hill.
Absolutely agree. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I guess I'll just put this over here. We're in the we're wrapping up, but if anybody else has any comments or thoughts or challenges they want to share or ideas.
All right. Well, I know that we're pressed for time and that we got to get out of here. We were probably supposed to be done a few minutes ago, but I really, really just want to say thanks again. Number one to Micah for pulling this PowerPoint together. It was obviously a really good looking PowerPoint, wasn't it, guys? It was super colorful. I can't put together colorful stuff. I always tell people I suck at arts and crafts. Not my thing. But also, thanks to Barb, just from that initial conversation that we had, it was really just, it was obvious to see that, you know, there was a desire to help and to do right by people. You know what I mean? That was the number one thing that I said when we had that conversation. I'm like, oh yeah, I'll definitely come talk to you guys if it's you, because, you know, I can really see where your heart is, and, you know, with the stuff with the work that you do. And it's an honor to have the opportunity, and I just want to say thanks.
Same here. I enjoyed it.
Well, thank you both for joining us tonight. Nathan, thank you so much for your service to our country. Micah, thank you so much for joining us, and you've really given us some things to take back to our clubs. We'll get a personality wheel out to everybody, and you can use it in your clubs and find out a little bit more about the people sitting at the table next to you, as well as your community members. So thank you so much for that. I do want to put in a real quick plug. On May 4th, the Jedi Committee will be hosting our third installment of our roundtable discussion. We want to hear from you. We want to hear what is working for your clubs, what's not working for your clubs. This is an open forum. It's a safe space. You can say whatever you like, talk about whatever you want. It is May 4th, and we picked that date specifically because, as the Jedi Committee, May the 4th be with you. So we had to get that Star Wars kick in there somewhere. So we hope you can join us. There'll be a flyer coming out, and check the Facebook page. Pre-registration is required for that. So if there are no further questions from anybody, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you, Barb. Thank you, Micah. Thank you, Nate. Hey, I hope everybody has a great night, and stay well, everyone.